Sarah's alarm screamed at 6:30 a.m., cutting through the fog of another restless night. 7 hours in bed, but her body felt like it had been fighting invisible battles all night long. She rolled over, reaching for her phone before her feet touched the cold, hardwood floor of her Brooklyn studio apartment. The notifications cascaded down the screen. Work emails, fitness app reminders, missed calls from her mother. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked puffy, older somehow than her 35 years warranted. Dark circles had become permanent fixtures, no amount of concealer quite masking the exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones. "You look tired, honey," her mother had said during their last video call. "Maybe try that new diet everyone's talking about, the one where you eat nothing but protein for 2 weeks." Sarah had tried them all: keto, paleo, intermittent fasting, juice cleanses. Each promised transformation, each delivered temporary results, followed by inevitable backsliding. Her gym membership card sat worn in her wallet, evidence of 5 a.m. workouts that left her more depleted than energized. The subway to Manhattan was packed with fellow commuters, most staring at screens, nursing oversized coffee cups like life support. Sarah found herself watching a Japanese woman sitting across from her, maybe in her 40s, but with a kind of calm that seemed impossible in the morning rush. The woman's eyes were closed, not in sleep, but in some kind of peaceful attention to her own breathing. When Sarah's phone buzzed with a work crisis, her heart immediately began its familiar race. The Japanese woman opened her eyes briefly, smiled softly at nothing in particular, then returned to her quiet state. Sarah wondered what that kind of inner stillness might feel like. At her desk in the open-plan office, artificial light buzzing overhead, Sarah pulled up the latest article her wellness-obsessed colleague had shared. Ancient Japanese habits that keep people slim without trying. She almost deleted it, another promise of effortless transformation. But something about the woman on the subway made her pause. The article wasn't about miraculous superfoods or extreme workouts. Instead, it described simple environmental changes: cooler sleeping temperatures, floor-level movement, mindful eating practices that had nothing to do with restriction and everything to do with attention. That evening, Sarah found herself in her cramped kitchen, holding the small ceramic rice bowl her grandmother had left her. She'd always used regular dinner plates, piling them high with food eaten while scrolling through social media. The bowl looked impossibly small in comparison, almost childlike, but the article had mentioned something about portion awareness. Not deprivation, but consciousness. She cooked a simple meal: brown rice, steamed vegetables, a piece of salmon. Instead of her usual plate, she used the bowl, filling it deliberately, slowly. Without her phone for distraction, she noticed the texture of each bite, the way her hunger shifted as she ate. Halfway through, something strange happened. She felt satisfied, not stuffed, not empty, but complete. Later, preparing for bed, she lowered the thermostat to 64 degrees, despite her initial resistance to the cold. The article had mentioned something about thermal regulation and stress hormones. As she settled under an extra blanket, her body began to relax in a way she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time in years, Sarah fell asleep without scrolling through her phone. If you've ever felt tired even after a full night of sleep, or frustrated with diets that don't last, tell us in the comments which part of this story feels familiar, and stay with us for the next chapters. Sarah woke without an alarm, sunlight filtering through her apartment's single window. The cold room had forced her body into deeper sleep cycles, and for the first time in months, her mind felt clear upon waking. Her Japanese co-worker Kenji noticed her unusual alertness during their morning meeting. "You seem different today," he said quietly as they walked to the coffee station. "Less frantic." Sarah laughed. "I tried sleeping in a freezing room last night. Weird, I know." Kenji smiled. "Not so weird. My grandmother always kept our house cold at night. Said heat makes the mind restless. You might like some other old habits too." That lunch break, instead of eating a sandwich at her desk while answering emails, Sarah tried something different. She took her small lunch to the office break room, sat on the floor with her back against the wall, the closest thing to tatami-level eating she could manage. Without her computer screen demanding attention, she noticed how quickly she usually ate, barely tasting her food. The rice bowl from the night before had started something. Today, she used a small container, eating slowly, pausing between bites. Her usual afternoon energy crash never came. "What are you doing down there?" asked her colleague Mike, grabbing chips from the vending machine. "Becoming a monk or something. Just trying something different. You know what works? Intermittent fasting. Starve yourself for 18 hours, then eat whatever you want. Lost 15 pounds in a month." Mike looked the same as always, tired, slightly grey around the edges, carrying the peculiar stress that came from constant dietary extremes. Sarah had tried his approach before. The restriction had worked temporarily, followed by inevitable binges that left her feeling more defeated than before. That evening, Sarah experimented with what the article called thermal contrast. Instead of her usual hot shower, she finished with 30 seconds of cold water. Her nervous system seemed to reset like a computer rebooting. The shock gave way to an unusual sense of calm alertness. Her sister called while Sarah was preparing dinner. "You sound weird," Amanda said. "Different. Are you on some new medication?" "No, just sleeping better." "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. You actually sound relaxed for once." Sarah looked around her small apartment, noticing how cluttered it had become. Mail stacked on the counter, clothes draped over chairs, surfaces covered with the detritus of a busy life. The Japanese concept of ma, deliberate emptiness, suddenly made sense. Her environment was keeping her mind in constant low-level agitation. That night, she spent 20 minutes clearing surfaces, creating small pockets of visual rest. She put her phone in another room an hour before bed, despite the anxiety of being disconnected. Instead, she sat with herbal tea in her grandmother's bowl, now repurposed as a cup, watching steam rise in the lamp's warm light. The silence felt foreign at first. Her mind reached for distractions, for the familiar stimulation of scrolling and consuming. But gradually, the quiet became spacious rather than empty. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders, permanently tight from hunching over a computer, began to release. When she finally went to bed, the cool room welcomed her like an embrace. 2 weeks into her quiet experiment with Japanese habits, Sarah's body began speaking a different language. She woke refreshed. Her afternoon energy remained stable, and the constant low-grade anxiety that had been her normal state started to fade. Dr. Peterson, her primary care physician, noticed immediately when Sarah came in for her routine checkup. "Your blood pressure is down," he said, checking the numbers twice. "Whatever you're doing, it's working. Have you been exercising more?" "Not really. Sleeping better, eating differently." "Well, your cortisol markers look better too. Stress hormones are significantly lower than last visit." The validation felt profound. Sarah wasn't imagining the changes. They were measurable, real. But not everyone celebrated her transformation. Mike at work had become increasingly critical of her new habits. "You're becoming anti-social," he said, when she declined to join the team's late dinner and drinks. "All this health stuff is making you boring." Amanda was more direct during their weekly coffee date. "You won't even split dessert anymore. And what's with eating from that tiny bowl? It's like you're playing house with your food." Sarah felt the familiar pull to people please, to abandon her new rhythm for social harmony. The old Sarah would have given in, ordered the chocolate cake, stayed out late despite knowing it would derail her sleep. But something deeper had shifted. These weren't rules she was following. They had become a way of caring for herself that felt essential. "I'm not trying to be difficult," Sarah said. "I'm just sleeping better and feeling better when I eat smaller portions. It's not about restriction." "It looks like restriction to me," Kenji found Sarah sitting alone in the office garden later that afternoon, looking discouraged. "My grandmother had a saying," he offered quietly. "The nail that sticks up gets hammered down. Sometimes when we change, it makes others uncomfortable with their own choices. I'm not trying to judge anyone. Of course not. But your peace makes their chaos more visible. That's threatening." Sarah spent that evening practicing what had become her routine: thermal contrast in the shower, dinner from her grandmother's bowl eaten in silence, early screen cut-off, cool bedroom for deep sleep. Each habit felt less like discipline and more like kindness toward her own nervous system. She noticed how her relationship to hunger had changed. Instead of the desperate, blood sugar-driven cravings that used to send her to the vending machine or late-night takeout, she felt steady, nourished. The constant mental chatter about food, what she should eat, what she shouldn't, how much when, had quieted to a whisper. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Team Happy Hour Friday. Don't be a hermit." Sarah stared at the message, feeling the familiar tug between her old social identity and this new way of being. The old Sarah lived for external validation, saying yes to everything, pushing through exhaustion to maintain relationships that often left her drained. She typed back, "Can't stay late, but I'll stop by for a bit." It felt like a compromise that honored both her boundaries and her connections, a middle path that the old all-or-nothing Sarah had never considered possible. Would you rather force yourself with willpower or redesign your environment and habits like this character is learning to do? Comment which path makes more sense to you, and share this episode with someone who needs a gentler approach to change. The test came during Sarah's busiest work week of the year. A major project deadline coincided with her mother's visit, creating the perfect storm of stress that would have previously sent her into survival mode. Late nights, caffeine overload, emotional eating, and sleep sacrifice. "Honey, you're being ridiculous about this cold room," her mother complained on the second night of her visit. "It's like sleeping in a refrigerator. And what's with this tiny bowl? Are you on some extreme diet again?" Sarah felt the familiar guilt spiral beginning. Her mother's disapproval triggered old patterns of wanting to please, to prove she was normal, to abandon anything that seemed too different or difficult. The work crisis escalated. Her team needed to pull an all-nighter to meet the client deadline. The old Sarah would have powered through on pizza and energy drinks, sleeping 3 hours and feeling like a warrior for her sacrifice. "Come on, Sarah," Mike said at 8 p.m. when she started packing up her laptop. "This is when we prove we're serious about our careers. Don't tell me you're going home to meditate or whatever it is you do now." Standing at the crossroads between her old identity and new rhythm, Sarah felt the weight of everyone's expectations. Her mother wanted her to eat normally. Her colleagues wanted her to grind through the night. Her social circle wanted her to return to late dinners and weekend binges. But her body had started speaking more clearly. The afternoon she tried returning to her old lunch habit, eating quickly at her desk while multitasking. Her energy crashed so hard she could barely focus. When she experimented with sleeping warm again, she woke feeling drugged and disoriented. "I'm going to work from home tonight," she told Mike. "I'll have my parts done by morning, but I need to protect my sleep." That's not how teamwork works, Sarah. Watch me deliver better work than I ever have, rested instead of exhausted. At home, Sarah faced her mother's hurt feelings and continued criticism. Instead of engaging in the familiar dance of justification and guilt, she tried something different. "Mum, these changes aren't about you or anyone else. They're about me finally figuring out how to take care of myself in a way that works. I'm happier and healthier than I've been in years. You just seem so controlled, so rigid." Sarah looked at her grandmother's bowl, sitting clean and ready for dinner. "It's not rigid, it's responsive. I'm finally listening to what my body actually needs instead of what I think I should want." That night, she maintained her routine despite the household tension. Cool room, early screen cut-off, thermal contrast shower. She worked steadily from her laptop until 10 p.m., then stopped, trusting that a rested mind would be more creative than an exhausted one. She woke at 5:30 a.m. naturally, mind clear and focused. In 2 hours of deep concentration, she produced work that surprised even her, creative, thoughtful, free of the scattered errors that usually plagued her sleep-deprived efforts. When she arrived at the office that morning, Mike and the rest of the team looked like survivors of a shipwreck, red-eyed, jittery from caffeine, wearing yesterday's clothes. "How do you look like that after missing the all-nighter?" Mike asked, genuinely confused. "I worked from home until 10, then slept 8 hours. Got more done this morning than I usually do in a full day of meetings." Kenji smiled from across the conference table. "My grandmother always said, the sharpest blade is the one that's properly cared for, not the one that's used until it's dull." The client meeting went better than expected. Sarah's work stood out not just for its quality, but for her calm presence during the presentation. While her teammates struggled to focus through their exhaustion, she felt grounded, articulate, present. Walking home that evening, Sarah realized something had fundamentally shifted. The habits that once felt like restrictions now felt like a foundation, not rules imposed from outside, but agreements she'd made with her own well-being. Her grandmother's bowl sat waiting on the counter, ready for another quiet dinner. 3 months into her transformation, Sarah sat across from Dr. Peterson, staring at lab results that told a story she was still learning to believe. "Your inflammatory markers are in the lowest quartile for your age group," he said, genuine amazement in his voice. "Your blood sugar regulation has improved significantly. Most importantly, your cortisol patterns show you're managing stress completely differently than before." "I feel different," she said, "but I wasn't expecting it to show up in blood work." "What exactly have you been doing? Because whatever it is, it's working better than most medical interventions I prescribe." Sarah tried to explain the collection of small habits that had become her new normal. The cool, sleeping temperature, floor-level movement, mindful eating from her grandmother's bowl, thermal contrast, deliberate emptiness in her environment, early darkness, single tasking, acceptance of life's natural rhythms. "It sounds almost too simple," Dr. Peterson said. "Most people want a pill or a procedure. You're telling me you changed your entire metabolic profile by adjusting your thermostat and eating from a smaller bowl." It wasn't just the individual habits. It was a different relationship with my own needs. That evening, Sarah sat on her apartment floor with her grandmother's bowl, now serving its nightly purpose as both plate and teacup. The simple ceramic had become the symbol of something larger, a return to attention, to slowness, to the radical act of listening to her body instead of overriding its signals. She thought about the person she'd been just months ago, desperate for transformation, trying every extreme diet and workout program, exhausted from forcing her way through life with willpower alone. That Sarah had believed discipline meant suffering, that change required dramatic deprivation and punishment. But the real secret hadn't been in addition, more rules, more restriction, more grinding effort. The transformation had come through subtraction, through creating space for her nervous system to regulate itself, through environmental changes that made healthier choices feel natural instead of forced. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Okay, I have to admit it. You look amazing. Not just thinner, but calmer, happier." "What's your secret?" Sarah smiled, running her fingers around the rim of the bowl. The secret wasn't a secret at all. It was available to anyone willing to slow down enough to notice what their body was actually requesting. But it required abandoning the cultural story that equated wellness with extremes, that mistook intensity for effectiveness. "The secret is, there is no secret," she typed back. "Just ancient habits that help your nervous system remember how to be calm." Mike had finally stopped making comments about her weird behavior, especially after she'd started consistently outperforming the rest of the team. Her sustained energy and clear thinking stood in stark contrast to the caffeine crash cycles that plagued most of their office. Even her mother had grudgingly admitted that Sarah seemed more peaceful during their last video call. "You just seem more yourself," she had said, less frantic. "I still think the cold room is ridiculous, but whatever makes you happy." Sitting in her quiet apartment, Sarah realized the deepest change wasn't in her lab results or her clothes fitting differently. She had fundamentally altered her identity from someone who fought against her body to someone who collaborated with it, from someone who believed she needed to be stronger to someone who understood she needed to be gentler. The Japanese concept of shizen no ugoki, natural movement, had taught her that health wasn't about forcing change, but about creating conditions where well-being could emerge organically. Her grandmother's bowl had become the perfect metaphor, not empty from deprivation, but spacious enough to be filled with exactly what was needed. 1 year later, Sarah stood in her kitchen, preparing lunch in her grandmother's bowl, when Kenji stopped by to pick up some work documents. He paused, watching her deliberate movements, the quiet attention she brought to the simple task. "You know," he said, "my grandmother would have liked you. She always said Americans move too fast to taste their food." Sarah smiled, thinking of the woman who'd left her this small ceramic vessel that had become the foundation of so much change. "I think I finally understand what she knew instinctively. The transformation had been so gradual, so integrated into her daily life, that she sometimes forgot how different everything had become. Her energy remained stable throughout the day. Sleep came easily in her cool, uncluttered bedroom. The constant mental chatter about food, weight, and willpower had faded to occasional whispers. Most remarkably, the habits that once required conscious effort had become automatic. Her body now craved the rhythm of thermal contrast showers, the grounding sensation of floor-level eating, the spaciousness of single-tasking. What began as conscious choices had rewired into preferences. At work, younger colleagues often asked for her productivity secrets. Amazed by her sustained focus and calm presence during crisis situations. "I just sleep well and eat regularly," she would say, knowing it sounded impossibly simple. Mike had eventually started experimenting with some of her approaches, though he framed them as biohacks rather than ancient wisdom. Even Amanda had asked for the article that started everything, admitting that her own caffeine and chaos lifestyle was becoming unsustainable. Dr. Peterson used Sarah's case as an example in medical conferences, illustrating how environmental modifications could achieve metabolic improvements that rivaled pharmaceutical interventions. The most profound medical tool, he would say, isn't always the most complex one, but for Sarah, the real victory wasn't in the lab results or the weight loss or even the compliments from others. It was in the quiet moments, sitting with her evening tea, watching steam rise from the ceramic bowl, feeling her nervous system settle into the peace her grandmother had somehow embedded in this simple vessel. She thought about the woman on the subway who had first caught her attention with her inexplicable calm. Sarah now understood that stillness wasn't a luxury or a personality trait. It was a skill that could be cultivated through the patient practice of small, consistent habits. The ceramic bowl sat waiting to be filled again, embodying the essence of what she'd learned. That transformation didn't come from forcing fullness, but from creating perfect conditions for nourishment to naturally arise. In the quiet space between one breath and the next, Sarah tasted something her younger self had never known. The simple satisfaction of a body and mind that had learned to trust each other again. If this story reminded you that real transformation comes from small habits repeated over time, not from overnight fixes, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to start this journey with you in the next story.